Good morning, everyone. We're continuing our discussion of the Festival of Light. So let us begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your living presence within us, to be strong in our determination to live by Dharma, with selfless love, with constant receptivity to your transforming presence. We are your children. Guide us and bless us. Om. Peace. Amen. So yesterday we took the little bird. We're in the middle of the little bird story, which is the allegory of the soul's long journey. And we've taken the bird through the first stage, which is the manifestation. The fledgling bird is tossed out of the nest by its loving parents. It's sent out on a holy mission to be fruitful in the gifts you have given us, to expand and multiply them, and what you acquire share with all, for you are a part of all that is. And then the bird glories in its newfound strength and begins to think how foolish I would be to share my strength with anyone. What else is wisdom except to keep what is mine for myself? And then with that separation from the truth of his own nature, which is the greater reality, the bird is severely battered by circumstances of life, by wind and rain and storm. So that suffering awakens the bird to the idea that maybe he doesn't really know as much as he thinks he knows. So he shifts from self-declared reality, I know what's right, which is a necessary stage because we have to have a certain amount of ego strength before we can consider transcending that ego. So then the bird goes from declaring reality as he wants it to be to actually trying to attune himself to a greater reality and perceive truth as it actually is. So it comes from the revolt to the quest. Now, most of us, I believe, most people in my own life and the people that I associate with, we kind of vacillate between the revolt and the quest. And then there's a fourth stage, which is the redemption, which is where we're going. But most of us are struggling with trying to really understand reality as it is, and then having our vrittis eat us up and having us prefer our declaration of reality to actually questing after what's true. So it says, we now, like that little bird, have come to realize that buffeting winds are life's way of giving us strength and courage. What that means is the challenges that we face in life are really what help us to develop our strength. It's not that hardship itself is it's not hardship that gives us strength. It's the necessity to face into it. As Master said, difficulties are not sent to break our spirit, but to awaken within us the power of self-mastery that we have. There's very simple images that you can use for the actual real nature of life. And one of them is simply going to the gym. People go to the gym not necessarily because the process is pleasant, although some people learn to like it, but because by challenging our physical body against obstacles, we develop strength within us. And in the process of facing and confronting those obstacles, we also we transform ourselves. Speaking just of the gym, the willpower, that was the word I was looking for, the willpower needed to carry on against, and then we go to the gym and we deliberately increase the weight load that we're trying to lift. We deliberately increase the time in which we push or the number of repetitions, because once we master a certain challenge, then it's no longer a challenge, it just becomes the norm. And so then we have to add something more to it in order for us to get stronger. And nobody would go to the gym and just consistently do something that doesn't challenge you, because then you're not gaining anything. So in the same way, Divine Mother looks at our life, and we're here to grow. We're here to expand our understanding from delusion to enlightenment. We're not here just to drift along in whatever we already know. We're here for self-expansion. So she wants to make sure, in a very true sense, that the weight on the weight machine is sufficient so that we have to become bigger than we are in order to meet it. So we have come to realize that buffeting winds are life's way of giving us strength and courage. That by being buffeted by the wind, we awaken to our own strength. And that's how, at least how I read this. You might also say, because he says, surrender to me, or the wind says, how does he put it exactly? Give yourself into my hands, cried the wind. To your strength I can then add my own. So it's also, what buffeting winds also do is they awaken us to the fact that there is a greater reality at play in our lives. And if we cooperate with that greater reality rather than resisting it, then we will find ourselves where we want to be. For those of you who listen every day to what I'm saying, 2 or 3 days ago was Martin Luther King Day in the United States. And celebrating, it was the 17th of January, but celebrating King's birthday, which is the 15th of January. And in that, in my talk on that day, I read from something that Swami said in a public talk in the year 1980, and it was in my book Light Bearer, just to follow all the steps. It's the first pages of the year 1980 in my book Light Bearer. And Swami wrote so interestingly about the fact that this new energy is pouring into this planet. This is Dwapara Yuga, and I've mentioned it so many times I won't explain it here. It's a higher age, and literally the planet is being energized with more enlightened rays. And Swami said, people everywhere are feeling this increase in energy, and some people are recognizing its potential for good and trying to cooperate. We're trying to raise our own vibration to match the higher vibrations that are coming in and tune into that power and use it for good. There are other people who feel that increasing power and are magnetized to try to master that power with their ego and use it in not to attune themselves to a greater reality, but to draw that power into themselves and make themselves more egoically powerful. And he said, and those who are trying to master it with their egos are using violence, fanaticism, sensuality, and he said drugs. In other words, either it's this ever-intensifying self-indulgence of pleasure and desire, or this willingness to sort of calculate how that energy can be used. That's why we're getting so many demagogues who are appealing to the basest instincts in people: self-protection, race hatred, religious sectarianism, an inclination to violence on their part, because individuals who have enough personal development to be able to exert a charismatic force, they're gathering that energy and then they're turning it in exceedingly negative ways, but they're using it in a very smart way. When I was watching some of these politicians, and people said, well, he's just being so foolish, he's contradicting himself, or that one, or she, or he, just transparent to some people. But sometimes I see that these politicians are stupid like foxes. They know exactly what they're doing, which is they are using that power and awakening that power in others who are vulnerable to that kind of demagoguery. That's the world we're living in. These buffeting winds that come to us They're just energy. And how we turn them is really whether they go for good or for ill. But the buffeting winds are there to give us strength and courage if we respond to them properly. So he says, and he goes on to say, that even fear, like shadows on a statue, gives light and substance to hope. Now that's a very interesting phrase that I've never been quite entirely clear what Swami means by this. The concept of fear has always been something that my mind turns around a lot because I've been, I've had that as a deep-seated quality within me. Just it's a past life, you know. To be high-strung and a little anxious has been my unfortunate fallback position, is the way I would say it. So I've thought a lot about fear, and one of the very first pieces of aphorisms that I learned on the path of self-realization many years later, I found out is actually from the Gospel of John in the Bible. And it's perfect love casts out all fear. And it struck me right at the moment when I read it, which would have been 1966, just before I turned 19, because fear had always been a problem. And I'd come to the point of thinking that fear was a useless emotion. So I've always had trouble here. Fear, like shadows on a statue, that fear has a purpose. But perfect love casts out fear. And the way I've tried to work with that, and this understanding in my heart is incomplete, so I'm putting it forward as what I've been chewing on for many years. Perfect love in that sense is the love that God gives to us, and the opportunity we have twofold: to give that love back to God, and also to share that love with others. And when we're thinking about receiving or giving love, I mean, the power of love is that it does take away our fears. I remember in a circumstance when I was procrastinating some important decisions that had to be made, and a friend of mine was trying to help me by telling me that if I didn't, take myself in hand, make the decisions and make the plans, that there was going to be this cascading series of difficulties that was going to fall on my head. And my friend was trying to help me by telling me that. And I said back, I'm perfectly aware of the jeopardy that I put myself in, but I'm having trouble making decisions because I'm afraid. So if you just tell me even more all the bad things that are going to happen to me, it's just going to make me more afraid. I said, what I need for you is to love me. Just love me and tell me it's going to be okay, because then I won't be so afraid, and then I'll be able to make the decisions. To the credit of my friend, they understood perfectly, and from then on treated me differently because their goal was to help me. So even fear, like shadows on a statue, gives light and substance to hope. Perhaps it's the contrast, between light and shadow. He says, like shadows on a statue. The way the statue is formed, it makes what you want to show stand out even more. And if the shadows are not used properly, then the whole aspect goes flat, and you can't really see the contours, the depth of the contours. So I guess in a way you could say it, every time we have fear and anxiety about something, and then the divine light comes in and rescues us, then the power of that divine light is all the more vivid because we have experienced its contrast. And so the statue is more vivid, the parts that want to be emphasized are more vivid because of the background of the shadow that's behind them. Gives light and substance. Fear, like shadows on a statue, gives light and substance to hope. We become anxious. We see the solution. The solution is more vivid because of the darkness that preceded it. This is what I'm going to offer, is what Swamiji means here. So now we have, finished a lot of the story of the bird, and now we've brought the bird into our lives. Now we're no longer, we now, like that little bird, have come to realize that buffeting winds, etc. So now this is not just about the bird. We now, like that little bird. So then we go on, and now we're talking about ourselves. Now we're not trying to make a fledgling bird us. From the depths of unknowing, Lord, we cry out to thee. So you don't call to God until you realize that you need his help. As long as your ego is working fine and everything is going the way you want it, and you feel like you're in control and you haven't been caught in the storm or lost in the darkness, you don't call to God. That's why most people in the world don't call to God. Most people in the world, even those some who may practice religion, are just practicing religion. They're not in their hearts really desperately calling to God because their lives are working. Ananda, the path of self-realization, we don't, I live in an area where there's many wealthy, highly successful people, and there are certain churches in the area where such people go, and they congregate and they meet each other. But, the highly successful percentage of people in this valley do not come into our church. It's not that none of them might be interested even in Master's teaching. Famously, Stephen Jobs was very interested in Master's teaching, but of course he was a revolutionary. But what I'm actually saying is that people for whom this world is really working seldom seek out a spiritual teaching that tells them to transcend this world. I remember when I was at a conference in the state of Oregon, and the subject was communities. This was in the early 80s. And Peter Caddy was there, who was the founder and at that time also the leader of the Findhorn community in Scotland, which was a very successful, lovely place in the 1980s as well as now. But in the 80s, Findhorn and Ananda, the planet, were two of the more prominently successful communities of that time. I was there representing Ananda. I'm not sure whether Swami had been invited and couldn't go or whatever it was. I was there for Ananda. I had a beautiful slide presentation of our community as it had developed at that point. I, of course, was very articulate, and I was a founding member. So I brought a lot to it. I was very articulate about Ananda, I could say. I was qualified to really talk about what we were doing, is what I meant by that. And Peter Caddy was just the darling of the program. Of course, his stature as a leader was enormous, and I was really completely unknown. That was, of course, part of it. But there were many others there who were essentially my peers. I couldn't get anybody to be interested in Ananda. It was really, really fascinating to me. People flocked to a gathering where people were showing you pictures of land they hoped to buy, and then they hoped to be able to make a community on it. And everybody was so involved, and there I was with an accomplished fact and the experience to talk about it, and I couldn't get people interested. So Peter Caddy was an acquaintance of mine, sufficiently so that I was talking to him, and I was curious. I said, Peter, everyone's interested in Findhorn. I can't get anybody to be interested in Ananda. And his answer was perfect. He said, Asha, Findhorn promises people heaven on earth. He said, you're telling people they have to transcend earth to get to heaven. He said, nobody wants to do that. I thought, you're absolutely right. And so it's not true that nobody wants to do it, but you have to reach a certain point in your own personal journey where you have realized the limits of this world to give you happiness and the limits of the ego to bring to you what you want. Wow, there we are. And so we go through the revolt, we lose everything we had repeatedly, we go through the storm, we go through the darkness, finally we come to the quest. And so here now is what the quest looks like. From the depths of unknowing, Lord. So we have to say, I really don't have the answer myself. We cry out to thee. Is there no lasting purpose to our lives? And that was the question I was born asking. Why am I here? What is the purpose of this life? And the answers that were given to me by well-meaning and loving people, because I was fortunate to be surrounded by those people, they didn't know. And they were able to just go on, just passing the time, raising children, having careers, doing what they wanted to do. But I cried out, is there no lasting purpose to this life? Behold, all that we thought was light was but darkness, meaning, what else is wisdom except to keep what is mine for myself? Glorying in my newfound strength. I thought that was light, but it isn't. All that I thought was light was but darkness. So the question, who are we in reality? For what end were we made? Okay, now that is the quest. The revolt has not been successful. I've forgotten my mission. Now I'm on a quest. Who are we in reality? For what end were we made? And when the disciple is ready, the guru comes. When the request is sincere, God answers. When we're just trying to get God to do it our way, or just want to use his imprimatur to strengthen our egoic convictions, then it's hard for God to answer because there's no matching vibration for him to come into. But when the quest is really sincere, then. And now then, Swami writes, ever and again, through your awakened sons, the answer comes. Now, who are the awakened sons? Think about Jesus as the Son of God, the only Son of God, which is actually the state of consciousness that Jesus had achieved, which was God realization, which was he was the Christ. Krishna was also the Christ. Christ is a state of consciousness. Jesus was the man. Christ consciousness is what he had attained, which made him an awakened son. Ever and again, throughout human history, ever and again, through your awakened sons, the answer comes. Now, this is a reference to the oneness of revelation, that all true masters offer the same truth, the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion, that which is. They have a revelation, and they perceive reality. They don't create up a dogma and then try to persuade us. They perceive reality and then do their best to communicate to us that which is. Ever and again, through your awakened sons, the answer comes. And this is the answer. The forming of stars and moons and planets. Oh my, we're all the way out to the galactic gases, aren't we now? It used to be a joke at Ananda that sometimes you ask Swami a simple question and he has to start with the galactic gases to be able to explain to you what the answer is. And that sort of became a code phrase for meaning, well, you really want to take it down, you want to strip it down to its foundation and then build it up again. We're going to start with the galactic gases. But the awakened sons give us the answer, and they start with the galactic gases, the forming of stars and moons and planets, of galaxies revolving on the tides of space. So all of a sudden, I just asked, who am I in reality? For what purpose is my little life? And now the awakened sons are telling me, sun and moon and galaxies revolving on the tides of space. This is perhaps the greater reality of which I am a part, but how does it relate to me? The forming of stars and moons and planets, of galaxies revolving on the tides of space. Now, note that word, forming of. He's talking about creation itself. For what end were we made? So now we're going to hear about creation itself. The forming of stars and moons and planets, of galaxies revolving on the tides of space. Then we start bringing it down to Earth, of drifting continents, upheaving mountains, snowy wastes, and dark, silent ocean deep. So now we're at least living more or less on Earth, but we're living on Earth in its grandest scale. The forming of creation itself had but this for its design, the birth of life. Okay, this is God's reason for making creation. It's a living entity. So that also is a statement in itself. Stars and moons and planets and galaxies and continents and mountains. It's the birth of life. All of it is living. All of it is filled with consciousness. There's not like inert, nothing, everything is consciousness. Nothing is inert. Consciousness may manifest more or less actively, but there is nothing that is outside this birth of life. The forming of this reality had for its design, had but this for its design, the birth of life. And with life's birth, the dawn of self-awareness. Now he's answering the question, who am I? For what purpose was I made? Life itself has the purpose of ever-increasing awareness, ever-increasing awareness of itself, self-awareness. And then he says, passage through dim corridors of waking consciousness, meaning all of the shadow worlds we have, dim corridors of waking consciousness. He doesn't mean a physical sleep. He means awakening to the true purpose of our life. Passage through dim corridors of waking consciousness, not superconscious wakefulness, but just ordinary human life. Just passage through all these lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, the soul's long journey. We're on this holy mission. We glory in our newfound strength. These are the dim passages of waking consciousness. I'm here, I'm doing it, but I don't know what I'm doing. And then he says, to emerge at last into infinite light, into perfect joy. So I said, who am I in reality? For what end was I made? You were created to become, to know yourself as infinite light and perfect joy. That all of these passages through all these shadow worlds, it's a means to an end. It's to emerge at last into infinite light, into perfect joy. And then Swami changes the tone of it into an exhortation to those who are there. He's answered the question, now it's an exhortation. And he says, "O children of light, forsake the darkness." So we've followed the bird through this long cycle. We've come to the edge of our ability. We've now joined the quest, and we're pleading with the divine to show us. Ever and again through your awakened sons, the answer comes. All of creation is for one purpose. All of creation is there that we may ever expand our awareness to arrive into infinite light, into perfect joy. And then the festival itself pleads with us, "O children of light, forsake the darkness." God bless you.